You said you're on the East Coast. Were you at, like, your son's baseball game, a Yankee game? Where were you at?
No, we're in Richmond, Virginia, and we have a minor league team here, Flying Squirrels, and my wife threw out the first pitch tonight, so we got some comp tickets, so we went along and had, my son went on the field and had some fun, and we watched the game for a bit. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. I'm a big Flying Squirrels fan. Huge baseball guy, by the way. Yeah. Are you a big baseball guy? We could talk baseball on this show, too.
No, not at all. I mean, I've been to a lot of games, I've worked at a lot of ballparks, and, I used to go to the Rays games when I lived in Tampa quite a bit, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
The first question I wanted to get into is basically, right off the bat, start from the bottom up. You were very young in your career. Before you even started bodybuilding, before you even probably thought you were going to be a professional wrestler, you were actually very proficient in swimming and tennis, no?
Yeah. I was a sports kid. My father was a professional rugby player, so sports and was a big part of our culture and our life. And when I was growing up, obviously football in England, soccer was obviously his life.
Absolutely.
And so for that, it was that was what everybody played, but there was also, we always, swimming was always a big part of my childhood. We would go every week, and I just, I had the right build for it, so I guess I just sort of took to it well and never really thought about it that much. But one day I was just swimming as normal, and somebody there recorded my times, and they came to me and said, do you compete, or do you have anything for, a part of any teams or anything like that? And I said, no, just never really done anything like that. And they said, oh, because, I would just sort of clocked you casually, and your times are up there with, you're up there sort of at the, higher end of the of the average. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I guess they sent it to one of my PE teachers at school. And then they looked at it, and then they came to me and said, look, we can submit a team if you know what I mean, into the national championships, with this time, if we can get a team together and stuff. And so that's what we did. It was pretty cool, because I was like, cool, that sounds fun, it was, for me, because obviously I was already, I think I was 14 when we did that, and so I was already thinking about pro wrestling and, wanting to be in front of crowds and stuff like that. And I think there was about 5,000 people there, so it was pretty cool feeling, and I did okay. I think I came fourth in my whatever. And I just remember thinking that was the coolest thing, and that was that. And then with tennis, kind of the same thing. Just played in regional tournaments and stuff, and then got invited to play in the nationals. I mean, I got eliminated in the first round, but hey, I was still in the nationals.
And you were a young kid too, right?
Yeah, that was all in my teens when I was in high school. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. And then you got into bodybuilding. You mentioned you had the build for swimming. Were you a lean guy, and then all of a sudden it was like you always said you wanted to be a professional wrestler? You kind of just turned it on from there. What'd you do, diet wise and lifting wise? Because that's again a full-time job, bodybuilding.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because people sort of bring that up as far as oh, you were in bodybuilding. So I don't really know where that came from, because to me, I think of bodybuilding as competing, and I never did that. That would be, that would be a misrepresentation. But I certainly was a fan of bodybuilding and studied it and enjoyed it. And to me, it was just when wrestling really captivated my attention the second time around, because I sort of, like a lot of kids, I think, in the mid-90s, I kind of fell off a little bit with wrestling. I was into it in the early 90s, and then kind of by the mid-90s, I'd sort of fallen off a little bit. I was still a huge Bret the Hitman Hart fan and British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith fan and stuff like that, but I wasn't an adamant fan, and then as the Attitude Era took off, like Bad Blood 97 with the first Hell in a Cell with Shawn and Undertaker, that was the thing that made me go wrestling's different, it's got cool, and so once that sort of sunk in, and then by the time I got to 99, WrestleMania 15, The Rock and Stone Cold, I was just I was 100% just so I watched every single thing I could, and I I think subconsciously I had always wanted to be have a good physique and be bigger anyway, because I was always a skinny kid, and I think it just those two things just sort of correlated, because I know I had always wanted to do that, and I know my older sister tells me now, like when I was a really small kid, I used to say, like, I'm going to lift weights and be big and strong, and
right.
So I think it all just kind of fell together, and then when I found wrestling, it was this perfect outlet to do that, and to be an entertainer, and to be an athlete. You got to be everything.
You mentioned, like, growing up watching the Attitude Era, Rock, Stone Cold, obviously the best era to watch pro wrestling, and that was probably the best era you could have asked for watching as a kid. And you mentioned Bret the Hitman Hart, just because I've kind of dabbled into it. I haven't really studied this that much, but I've been studying it lately, was the Montreal Screwjob. Just very quick, your take on that. Was that a shoot, or was that an angle?
I don't believe it was an angle. I've heard every conceivable, opinion on it. I saw the Vice thing last night. And I've had that same conversation with Scott Hall and with other people, where they've said, how come they shot it, and how come they, there is definitely some relevance to that question. But to me, I just think that's probably, you got to ask Kevin Dunn, because I'm sure that it was just his instinct to just go, well, whatever happens, it's like, let's get it on camera and get it on tape, and it'll be there for prosperity. I mean, and let's face it, it's become, one of the most valuable pieces of footage of all time in pro wrestling, considering that it was, super controversial, and people, everybody, the thing about it is that, it was painful for Bret at the time, and I empathize with him, and I empathize with all the parties involved to an extent, although I do think it could have been avoided. But in reality, everybody benefited from that. Everybody made money, and they're still making money off it to this day. So, in the end, everybody won.
Absolutely. Great overall event that took place, changed the whole complexion of the wrestling business back in 97. Do you think anything like that could ever happen again?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and honestly, with the emotions and the egos and the live nature, anytime it's live, there's always a chance that something could happen. I mean, a double cross like that is unlikely, but there's always a chance, that someone could go into business for themselves. It's kind of like it's our code of conduct with each other that we honor that prevents us from doing that. But things can happen, and I would never rule something like that out.
That would be something. That would be, again, event-changing, game-changing in the wrestling business. But more on to you. So you enter pro wrestling, and I've been debating this with Barkley since we actually got on this. Was it DAM Promotions, DAM Promotions?
No, I didn't work for that. I know who you're talking about, but I didn't start with that. I started with the Knight family.
But I know when you started out, before you actually made the move to TNA, you wrestled Marty Scurll in that last match, and you actually got Marty Scurll in NWA Crockett Cup in a few weeks. How's the build to that storyline been, and are you excited for the match?
Hugely excited for the match. It's the match I'm most looking forward to since Cody, really. And Marty and I, we've been friends for a long time. We legitimately went to wrestling school together, and I used to pick him up, every Sunday, and we would drive down to Dropkicks Academy, and like that was us. And then we've done the holiday camps together. We've come up, through a lot of different things together, and then we, like a lot of people in the business, we take our different paths to get to where we are, and then eventually, we found ourselves sort of working together again, like when I started with doing the NWA stuff, and we're having success as the world champion. That led to a relationship with Ring of Honor, and then All In and everything like that. And I think right off the bat, the relationship with Marty was one of the things that opened the door to that. So I think it was, it was always known that it was going to lead to a confrontation between us eventually in a title match.
And I can't wait for that match. NWA Crockett Cup between Aldis and Skrull. But after that match, early on in your career, you actually made the switch over to TNA, in which you adapted the name Magnus. What came about the name Magnus? How'd you decide to go with that name?
Well, I didn't decide it.
Right.
That's the short answer. At that point, they had a full creative team and all that. And when I got there, I was handed a piece of paper, and I said, "What's this at the top?" And they said, "That's your name." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then that had my vignettes and everything like that. They even did my costume and stuff. So yeah, didn't have a lot of control over that.
And we spoke a little bit about All In earlier, and I had the opportunity to go there. I got a ticket with one of my buddies, and the atmosphere when you and Cody were in the ring, like before the match, there's a "This is awesome" chant, a standing ovation, and that was the biggest big fight feel that I've ever been a part of, and going to a wrestling show. And what was running through your head when that was happening?
It was obviously very, very special. It was. There was a small part of me that kind of thought that we would get that, but you can never really plan for it, because obviously if it doesn't happen, then you look like an idiot, kind of standing there sort of milking the reaction there, so like, but just based on the whole weekend, we had obviously there was all Starr cards and everything attached to it, and we had done the weigh-ins, and and David Zagana did such a great job, like timing the last release of that final episode of 10 Pounds, which was a long episode where it was very emotional, and it covered, Cody's relationship with his father and everything like that. You could just feel, by the time I showed up at the Starcast event the next day, you could just feel it from people, and I just sort of had this idea in my head that it was going to be like that, and I think Cody probably felt the same way, but we never really spoke about it to each other. And I think it just became this thing where we knew that by the time we had presented it with the entourages and like the in-ring introductions, and then Earl Hebner, the referee, giving the in-ring instructions, I think we just knew that we were going to get them. And then when it happened, obviously it was, it's indescribable when you have a moment like that, and it's something that I'll never forget.
And that whole event, All In, so many different names and faces there. First event, it was produced by Rhodes and Matt Nick Jackson. How was the entire atmosphere backstage in production with all those different guys there? Jericho was there for about 10 minutes before he left for Fozzy. How was that whole situation there backstage?
It was the coolest. It really was the coolest thing I've ever been a part of, because backstage, the atmosphere was so great. Everyone was just so on point. You could just feel that everybody wanted it to work. And Ring of Honor obviously would produced that with so there was a lot of familiarity there because everybody knew each other. So the production was on point, and I think everybody respected each other, and everyone was everyone was mutually happy for one another. There was no sort of any bitterness about who had what spot or anything like that. Everyone knew what was going to work, and Daivari was there for my entourage, and Jeff Jarrett and stuff, and it's cool to me that I had my entourage there, and 3 of those 4 guys now have gone on to sign with WWE, and I remember Daivari saying to me at the time, he goes, this is the coolest thing I've ever been a part of, because he said it felt like everybody was over, everybody got a great reaction, the whole, the audience, the whole thing, it was just it was jubilant,
I mean, it looked like an awesome event. Barkley said it himself. He was there that night in Chicago. Obviously, Cody Rhodes, Young Bucks go on to form All Elite Wrestling. They have their first event on May 25th. And I know you're with NWA at the moment. Was there any inkling of you that ever wanted to join AEW right off the bat? And would you ever consider joining All Elite Wrestling?
You never rule anything out. That's a given. We've obviously, they're friends of mine, and I was aware of that stuff, happening, and there were some conversations, and it's no secret to the NWA or to me or to Billy and Dave, but they made an offer to me, but I just decided to stay put right now because I'm this might have been my favorite body of work to date, and I feel like there's a lot left to do, and I feel like the NWA has a huge amount of growth potential, and I want to be a part of it because I've been a part of it from Jump Street,
Oh, absolutely. And you just said it right there. NWA's definitely been one of your favorite promotions to work with.
It's absolutely. I mean, because honestly, it's because I've pretty much been instrumental in building it, and that's obviously a very cool feeling, and I'm heavily involved in the whole process, right? Like not just the talent, and it's when you talk about that moment with Cody at All In, like Dave and I had this conversation afterwards where I said this was gratifying to me because I think of all the conversations I've had when I was at TNA and had a different idea of how to present myself and want to do it, and I was always told, you don't get paid to write, you get paid to do what we tell you, and then to be able to have that moment, which was, arguably the biggest thing in wrestling at the time, one of the biggest things in the business of that year, and to think that all of that was done through our own work, we did all that together. Like, it wasn't one person going, do it like this is what's written down. Like, everybody collaborated, and that's when you get the best in this business.
And so you said NWA's, your favorite promotion that you've worked with. You came in a couple years ago. You challenged Tim Storm. You were defeated the first time. You came back, and the second time, got the championship. You go on to defend it all over the world. You have matches, a lot of people talk about the one in China with Colt Cabana, who you actually wrestled not too long ago in Ring of Honor. But how does it feel to be that guy, that the centerpiece, essentially, of the NWA over the past couple of years and going forward?
It's anytime, a promotion decides to, give you the opportunity to be a champion, you understand the responsibility because, being a champion, obviously, in the wrestling business, we're not talking about, like, you don't really win. You know what I mean? It's not like, you don't win. You didn't really win the championship, right? Like, we all know what we're doing here. But it's a stamp of approval that you can sort of be the driving force of the promotion, of the brand, and everything like that. And obviously for me, like, that's a responsibility I take very seriously. And also it's like, it's a challenge to your work because you've got to go to all these different towns, all these different countries, all these different competitors of different levels, and you've got to bring out the best in them, even though most of the time, the audience, if you're doing a show in for example, I had a show in Concord, New Hampshire a few weeks ago. Hasn't really had any wrestling at that height, since the sort of 80s WWF, heyday when they were running 3 sets of house shows in one night. And we had a packed house and they were into it. But the challenge is always does anybody here really think they're going to see a title change tonight? It's not on TV. It's not on pay-per-view. It's not, it's not a high-caliber opponent. So it's your job to try to make people believe that maybe, just maybe, they can see it, and that's all in the way that you present yourself and the way that you carry yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't have said it better there. And do you feel as if, obviously way different in NWA or AEW, Ring of Honor for that matter, way different than WWE, the way they book things. Do you think it's more critical to have a big title change like that on a normal weekly show as opposed to at a big brand pay-per-view?
I think it can help, yes. I think that there are times where you do want to throw a bit of a curveball. I remember, it was a few years back now, I don't remember when, but WWE did a title change at a house show, and I thought that was interesting because it was just, that to me was always a smart move every now and then, just because it's that way to remind people, hey, you never know what's going to happen, you should buy a ticket. And, that's the business we're in. And, but to me, that's kind of what I was talking about before. Is like that's the challenge, right? Like you have to do everything you can to make people believe on that night that maybe that's going to be the special night for them, you know. And honestly, because you never know. I mean, look, I won the title the first time at CZW, you know, in some like flea market in Jersey. So it's like, you know, no one expected it to happen then either. So it's kind of like, you know, that's always been our, obviously with Cody, it was kind of like, people, you know, when it was 50-50, you know, like the way we had built it, it would have been hard for the people to come up short that night. But even at NWA 70, I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected, you know, me to regain the title 6 weeks later. You know, so it's like I think that ultimately it's like every move you make is a way to try to keep the audience on their toes and at the same time keep them satisfied, because that's the fine line you have with promoting, is giving people what they want, but also making them wonder what's going to happen.
Oh, 100%. You talk about that live event at WWE. I don't know if it's the same one. I was there when AJ Styles won the United States Championship at Madison Square Garden in a live event. Yeah.
I think that's the one I'm thinking of then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm kind of like it was a live event. You don't expect anything to happen. I'm just on my phone. You hear the 1, 2, 3. You look up. You're like, what the hell just happened? So, like, WWE, like, definitely threw a curveball there. AJ Styles winning the U.S. title. You've been in the ring with AJ Styles in TNA. Tell me what it was like wrestling a guy like AJ Styles. Two phenomenal, no pun intended, athletes of your caliber going at it in the ring.
Well, you know, AJ Styles and I are not the same caliber of athlete. No one, you know, AJ is in a league by himself. He's, you know, he really is. I've always said that about him. I've said publicly that I believed him to be the best in the business when he was in TNA. You know, but when I wrestled him in 2013, I believed he was the best in the business then, and I think it was proven. And obviously, then to see him, what he did in New Japan, and then to walk into WWE. Once upon a time, I remember having a conversation with when my contract was coming up at TNA in 2013. I went and had dinner with a WWE executive who will remain nameless.
Gotcha.
and we were talking about that, and this guy used to work at TNA, right? So we were talking about guys. That's how we had a relationship. And I mentioned in that conversation at dinner, I said AJ Styles is the best in the business, and he looked at me like I had said, you know, Gilbert was the best in the business.
Yeah, right.
He looked at me like, what? You know, like, and he was like, okay. You know, fast forward to like 4 or 5 years later, and now look, and you know, and AJ walked into WWE, got a huge pop, and never looked back, and has been a top star since day one.
I mean, 100%. So I guess the whole big thing with WWE, once you get there, Vince McMahon. I mean, what do we know as podcast hosts?
Exactly.
But
I
like,
was about to tell you, I wouldn't know either. I'm as qualified to talk about WWE and Vince McMahon as you are, because I've never worked there. And you know, nobody seems to know why. So.
And basically, the whole premise there is that until you prove yourself on TV in front of Vince McMahon, he really doesn't even know who you are. He kind of just like.
I'm sure that's right. Yeah.
And he kind of just, you know, like he probably listens to outside sources but doesn't really give a crap until you prove him wrong. AJ Styles definitely proven him wrong there. One of his last matches in TNA was with you.
I mean, I would say I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't know if it's a case of proving him wrong, because he was put in a spot to prove that. I think all he really did was just show him, you know, where he should go after that, because he debuted at the Royal Rumble. So, you know, there was obviously enough respect for him and his level of star power going in, you know, to debut him at the Royal Rumble. So I don't know if it's a case of proving him wrong. I think it was more a case of, okay, let's see what kind of reaction is, and it's a smart move to debut something like that in the Rumble, because that's going to be a barometer, you know, to show whether or not you're as popular as you think you are.
Given that we're on the topic of that, I asked you earlier if you'd ever consider joining AEW, basically say never say never. Is it the same situation with WWE sometime down the road? You said you talked with an executive that you will not name, understandable.
Yeah,
legal
that was
rights.
years ago. I mean, that was years ago. I mean, every time my deal would come up, it was just natural that you would put feelers out to the other side to help bump up your money. Like that's the business we're in. We're independent contractors. So that was it. That I wasn't doing it purely for that. But at the same time, TNA at the time, I worked my way up to get a pretty good deal, and I knew that WWE wouldn't be able to, but wouldn't have any reason to offer me that kind of money, in a starting position. But I was just curious to see whether or not I could, get a start at WWE, because obviously everybody knows, if you're gonna play football, you'll play in the NFL, right?
Right.
It's just the way it works. Mm-hmm. And so, that's a weird situation. It's like people sort of asking that all the time, like, hey, why don't you go to WWE? And it's like, oh, gee, I didn't think of that. Thanks. Like, it's not, it doesn't work like it's the same way with AJ and Joe and Bobby Roode and all these guys who went there in the end. It's like they stayed at TNA because they got better deals.
Right.
Because it's not just money. It's about schedule, and we used to sit there and kind of work out our expenses and tax and everything like that and go, well, I'd have to make at least, $75,000 a year more working at WWE just to take home the same amount of money, and how many more bumps am I going to take to do that? There's a lot of things to take into account, especially if you have families.
We talked a little about AJ Styles, his journey through WWE. Who knows, one day, maybe we'll see you there someday. But another guy you faced in TNA was his last TNA match. It was contract versus your TNA World Title was Sting. How was it like being in the ring with the icon Sting? Another different type of athlete compared to AJ Styles, but definitely an elite wrestler in the wrestling business.
Well, there are three if you include the time that I was in the ring with Hogan. I suppose I had some interactions with Ric Flair on some house shows when he was managing Beer Money, which was great fun. There's four people, I guess, that I've worked with to whom I genuinely could say I never thought I would be in the ring with, and that's Kurt Angle, Sting, Flair, and Hogan. And obviously, like I say, Hogan was just like some in-ring promos, and Flair was, when he was as a manager for Beer Money. So it was like, but the first time I worked with Sting, I was 22 years old. I was so green, and Steve really went to bat for me and basically said, I think that there's something in this kid, and I want to, but he needed what we call a reset,
right?
Because he had lost to Samoa Joe on a pay-per-view, and so the following TV, he needed a match to sort of get him back on track, right? And so, I was honored that he thought that I was, the right guy for that, because obviously it was a win-win, because I get to wrestle Sting in the main event of television at 22 years old, and Sting gets to, get a clean win over a big kid, so it's kind of like everybody, and I had, and I'm not selling myself short. I did have good heat, at the time with British Invasion did have good heat, so it was a good matchup for him. I'd never forget the minute that when he first walked out, I just, I forgot where I was for a minute. Like I was, to me, it's like that's literally a guy I watched as a child. So it's like to have him come out and I'm sitting there going, oh, I'm wrestling him. Like, what the hell?
Oh yeah, I know.
Doesn't get much bigger.
Same with Kurt. The first time I was in the ring with Kurt, I was kind of like, this is really happening. Like, wrestling Kurt Angle.
And so guys like Angle and Styles and Sting, what would you say is like your most surreal wrestling moment, given you've been in it for a long time now?
Certainly the like I just described with Sting when I wrestled him at Impact, because I remember when his music hit, like plays, a huge pop, and he comes walking out, and I'm stood in the middle of the ring, and I just remember for a second just being like completely frozen. And Doug Williams was out there with me, and obviously Doug was far more experienced than me. I remember Doug saying, like, he obviously could tell that I was a little bit like deer in the headlights, and he kind of went, "Snap out of it, mate. Get your head in the game," kind of thing. And he like, he's like, "I'll be right there at ringside." I can't tell you how much help Doug was to me in my career in those days. But he could tell obviously, because I think it was a big deal to him too, because he was just like, "Yeah, this is crazy." And I think just because of how young I was and how inexperienced I was at that time, I think that probably was the most surreal. But certainly, again, like then when we did the main event Mafia, like that was a pretty surreal thing too, because I remember thinking, how the hell do I qualified to be in this, with Joe, AJ, and Sting. And then, but for them to all say, no, they genuinely wanted me in that group, like that. And so that gave me a great deal of confidence. And then I remember it was in Las Vegas, and I remember thinking, if they say my name and I walk out here and the audience just farts all over it, like I'm dead. I'm dead in the water. Like my career here is over. And thankfully they didn't. Thankfully I got a decent reaction, and then I cut a good promo. And by the end of that, it was like you could feel the energy of people going, yes, cool. Like we're seeing a new guy here. Like we're okay with this. And that's such a huge thing because you have these moments. We have these sort of crossroads with the fans where it's a sort of sink or swim situation, and if you're perceptive, you kind of you know them, and then you kind of understand how important they are. And for that one, that one worked. So that was a big relief.
Oh, and like that's basically the name of the game. If you get over with the fans, it works. If you don't, you're kind of screwed in a way. And preferral here, do you like playing a face or a heel? I feel like a lot of guys prefer being the heel, but what about you, baby face or heel?
Heel, no question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just, you have to have a degree of self-awareness in this business, and I think the most important part of that is understanding that sometimes in life, even without trying, even though you can be there are going to be certain unavoidable things about human nature that you just can't change, or that you're gonna waste a lot of energy trying to change. And for me, I know that on paper or I guess visually or whatever, I might come across as like, this sort of heroic looking character or whatever. I know that in real life, like human nature, most people are going to take one look at me and be like, this prick, and to begin with, because it's just human nature. If you're taller and bigger and you look a certain way and you carry yourself with a certain degree of confidence, then people don't know what to do with that, and the human nature reaction to that is to be negative and cynical towards it. So I always knew that was the sort of natural way people went, and I've always believed that the best pro wrestling is authenticity with a dramatic edge. So it's kind of like take the way people really naturally feel, and then go with it and push down on it, and get as much out as you can. For me, it's like you get to manipulate people's emotions, and I get as much, like, I enjoy being a heel only because I enjoy setting myself up to make the people go crazy for the babyface. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not like I'm sitting there going, I really want people to hate me. Like, that's cool, that's fine. Like, obviously that's the job, but like, what I'm doing is I'm creating a situation where we can create, because I know I'm really good at being the other guy to create the moment, and it takes two, and there's a real honor in being the other part of that. And I think in the long run, you have more longevity that way, because I think over time, if you look at Ric Flair as a great example, almost all of Flair's biggest moments in this business were as a heel, but over time, overall, what is he to people? He's a legend. He's a hero. Like, because people go, he was the best. Like, he was an artist. Because he created the most must-see moments and must-win matches and made people along the way. And I think after a while, people understand that and respect that.
And you mentioned about getting into the business at such a young age, getting to be in the ring against the likes of Sting. And you talked about Doug Williams a little bit, kind of being a mentor there. Who would you say is your biggest mentor in the professional wrestling business, if not Doug Williams?
Kevin Nash has been a big mentor to me. Daivari was a big help when I first came to TNA. He basically came up to me and said, "Hey, I heard you get your hotels paid for in your deal." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Cool, we should be friends."
Nice.
I admired the honesty and just like the sort of cutthroat nature of his way. We're only a couple of years apart in age, but obviously he had. You talk about a guy who got a break at a young age. I mean, this is a guy who was 21. Like I think it was 20 or 21. He was working with Hogan and Shawn Michaels and WrestleMania. You know what I mean? He was different level. Undertaker, Angle, like the whole deal. WWE. So he was such a young veteran, and such a smart guy and such a good mind. And I even, he kind of went in exile for a while. Like, he didn't really do a lot in the business for a few years there, and we always remained tight. We were roommates for a while, and he just smartened me up about everything. And so like, it's very gratifying to me to see that when All In, I had him be in my entourage, and then I did a couple of interviews where I basically said he smartened me up more than anybody in this business. And then we did NWA 70, and I recommended him to be the producer for that event, the lead agent for that event, which he was, and he did a hell of a job. And then, a couple of months later, he gets a job at WWE, and, how much influence we had on that, who knows, but it was just cool to me to know that I was right.
Yeah.
And that, like, I knew that, because I would tell people all the time, that, he's such an untapped resource. He's such a smart guy. He's so diligent, so dedicated to the business, and now to see, he's a producer at WWE, which is exactly where he belongs.
Oh, and absolutely. I mean, he had that little TV angle with Road Dogg right off the bat after the Royal Rumble. I was actually at the Rumble sitting ringside. Elias is strumming his guitar and his music hits. That shocked me. One of your biggest mentors in the business. And if you haven't already had it, I mean, you have the likes of AJ Styles, Sting, Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, James Storm, even like you said, Cody Rhodes at All In. What's your one dream match if you haven't already had it in the professional wrestling business?
Oh gosh,
I stumped him, Barkley.
It's a good question.
Match, there's and the funny thing is I've been asked it before, and there's never really a good way to answer it. But yeah, I mean, because in reality, I think that I've worked with AJ Styles, but obviously I would love to wrestle him on the biggest stage possible. That would be incredible, just because I know how good it would be. But I'm answering that as a professional, right?
Right.
Because I know you're going to give yourself the best chance. Like, if Shawn Michaels was still active, I would say Shawn Michaels, because Shawn is untouchable. He's the best. He's Michael Jordan, and so in that respect, I guess Randy Orton would be someone I would love to wrestle, and Jeff Hardy, but in I suppose in a WWE ring or at least on a bigger national stage,
Right.
because Jeff and I always had such good chemistry. But I guess a dream match as far as people I haven't wrestled, then I would say Orton.
Randy Orton versus Nick Aldis. I'd pay to see that match. I don't know about you, Barkley.
Hey, Randy.
That's interesting for sure.
Randy Orton's got a very decorated career, but he's never had 10 pounds of gold.
Absolutely.
And he's the third generation guy. I mean, I'm sure it would mean a lot to him.
Very interesting. All right.
You never know. You never know in this business.
Like we always say, we are open for business. Cody Rhodes was a Ring of Honor contracted talent at the time of All In and all that, so it can be done if the parties want it to happen. Make the price right, brother.
I will keep that on my calendar, all right? That is a dream match waiting to happen, but so just a few more feuds that you had going back to your TNA days. I want to get into a little bit about the Samoa Joe, both tag team and feud that you had. I mean, you wrestled in a tag team in TNA for a little bit, which kind of transitioned into a feud. Talk to me a little bit about that before. I also want to ask you about your feud going into Slammiversary with James Storm.
Well, there's a lot to cover in that.
Oh, yeah.
I would say when you asked me before about guys who mentored me, like Joe has to be very high on that list as well. He really helped me out so much, and we got thrown together as a tag team, and they pretty much told us, like, we don't know what to do with you two, so we're just going to make you a tag team. And we just sort of went, oh. And I'm sure Joe was thinking, oh, great, like, I've got to be in a tag team with a guy who, like, I have, who's like about as opposite of me as you can get, but see, to me, I was such a huge fan of Joe's that I looked at it as, like, cool, I should be in a tag team with Joe. He's one of my favorite wrestlers, and I just knew how good he was, and I just right off the bat said, hey, because I knew all this stuff so well, and I pretty much just said, hey, what if instead of you doing this part, I do that part, but then you give him your atomic drop, and then I give him a boo, and then you give him the senton. It was like I knew all this stuff already, so I just kind of inserted myself in a way to make it seem fluid and cool. And suddenly, within a couple of matches, people were going like, "Holy God, this is such a great tag team! Like, amazing!" And we did it. We had good chemistry, and I think people were just. I think it was a double-edged sword, because it reminded people how good Joe was, and they like to see people. They like what people want to see with Joe is they want to see him smash people, and do it in the way that only he can. And then so they were getting that again, as opposed to what they've been getting before. And because you have to remember that Joe had been through some like pretty, random phases where he had like the weird face paint and the machete and all that, you know what I mean? The different
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
So like then they got classic Joe again, and that's what people wanted, right? And then at the same time they were getting to see this new side of like this guy who they thought, he's in a tag team with British Invasion, and then he just sort of been this like random sort of pretty boy, heavyweight guy that was body guy, like nothing really, no real substance to him. And then they saw, like, they started to see stuff, they started to see a bit of an attitude and a bit of an edge coming out, and, like, and started to see me improving in the ring, and then I think they just started to go, okay, and it was there was just that energy to it, and you could just feel it. The same thing as, like, I was talking about before with Cody and everything, it's like, you could feel people were, like, were getting into it, and then once we knew that, it was like, okay, we're off to the race.
And then the whole James Storm feud, and was hit and miss with this, watched it, turned the channel, watched it again. Your wife Mickey, of course, was involved in that feud leading up to Slammiversary. What was the whole storyline process behind that feud?
That was, they had pitched stuff with, to include Mickey before, and we had shut it down. Because I just always felt like it was cheap, and for me, it was very important to me that I established myself before we ever did anything like that, because the last thing I wanted to do was just to sort of be labeled, as like, he's like, obviously within the business, there's always going to be people that kind of try to heckle you with that stuff. It's like whatever, but in terms of the audience, as far as like your television character, I was very conscious to not be just for people's first impression of me as a character to be like, he's Mickey James' boyfriend sort of thing. So I felt like I needed to establish myself. I said by the time we had done that, I'd been world champion, so I was like, okay, it's different now, because certainly within in TNA's world anyway, she had been gone and I had been the top guy, so I was like, okay, it has more legitimacy now, because there'd be more sympathy, right? Because she wasn't Mickey James' top star, because she was a top star in TNA when she was there.
Right.
It was like she came in playing the role of, Mickey James, my fiance and mother of my child. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't, you know what I mean? Because she wasn't active there at the time, it worked. And
Yeah.
I think that was why we were okay with it, and it was just a cool way to do something that I'd never done. I'd never really done any of that sort of real Jerry Springer type of stuff. You know what I mean? Like the real personal sort of, and every now and then in wrestling, it's cool to do something like that. You don't want to do it all the time, but when I saw that, and I knew James was a great talker. Me and James always had good chemistry. We were great contrasts with each other. I just knew that it would work. So, and it did.
Right after that, TNA.
Thing, of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you actually, so jumping a few years ahead now, Global Force Wrestling comes knocking on the door. Started by Jeff Jarrett, of course, and you actually got the chance to wrestle Tommaso Ciampa before he made the switch over to NXT. Describe that match. That just sounds like an incredible match. Just thinking about it.
Yeah, it was fun. I would, I think it would be. I think both of us are much better now. I certainly feel like I'm much better now than I was then, because during that time at Global Force, like I didn't know who I was. I really, when I finished at TNA and I chose not to re-sign and sort of finished up there, I really felt like I had earned at least an opportunity with WWE. I really felt like I've done enough to at least get an opportunity, and I just got flat out just basically told F off.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went, and there's more to it, and I have too much respect for myself to go into what it is, but it's not my fault, and it's just stupid what it is, but it's there, but it was like I came to sort of crossroads where I went, well, who am I? What's going to happen now? What am I going to do? And I think with Jeff and Global Force and everything, he believed in me. He always did. I mean, he did the same thing in India with Rinka King, and then he was a very big advocate for me in TNA. So, he brought me in and I was the world champion, but they weren't getting the best version of me. Like, I was very much like going through the motions. I didn't really know who I was. I was trying to sort of find myself, and it was the first time I wrestled as myself, but I didn't really know who Nick Aldis was as far as the character, and and so at the time I just always felt like, that it felt temporary, and I didn't have the confidence, to really experiment with what I was doing. So it was very much just staying within like safe kind of confines of like my go-to stuff. So with the match with Tommaso, I remember it went fine, but it was just fine, and that had nothing to do with Tommaso, like he's a workhorse, and it was just one of those things where we just kind of, that was the first time we wrestled each other. It wasn't a clash of styles. I like being a contrast to guys like that, but it was just, it was fine, but you could see how good he was. I just felt like, we've both improved a hell of a lot since then, so it would be, I think it would be a whole different ballgame now.
And you meant that was kind of like when you began using your real name and Nick Aldis, you were Magnus for so many years. You mentioned all your heel work. Was it different? Like just being Nick Aldis out there, did you feel like you had to change your character-wise compared to who Magnus was in TNA all those years?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a difficult thing, isn't it? Because that's kind of the point. Is like so much of the Magnus character was me, So it's, when a lot of it really just came down to a name or a sort of type of presentation, it's tough because, then you having to, on one hand, you're trying to sort of reinvent yourself or reposition yourself, but at the same time, you're doing a lot of the same stuff that you did before, so then people beg the question, like, well, what makes this guy any different to Magnus, you know what I mean? And there was a conversation when, I don't know if you guys remember or saw this, but Impact, under their new owners or whatever, they suddenly put out this edict where they basically said, hey, anyone who had intellectual property with us before can use that name still.
Oh, yeah.
You're welcome. And we had that discussion. We said, do you want to go back to being Magnus now? But rather and build off of those years, 6 years on television. And I said, no, I think I want to stick with mine now because we've done it and it's authentic, and I'm glad I stuck by that decision, because I think that people now, the good thing about the name change is that people can kind of define that era of my career as the Magnus years. Do you know what I mean? And then as I became a man, and got into my, late 20s, early 30s, that's when you got Nick Aldis, you know what I mean? And that's when, that's when I sort of grew into myself.
Well, there you go. And then you, after Global Force Wrestling, you made the return to TNA, short-lived return. Was the return not what you anticipated? You went back to being Magnus.
Yeah, well, there's the perfect example of, your frustrations when you're dealing with a lot of people who don't belong in the positions they're in, right? And or who think they know better than you because it's their job to supposedly know better, right? And that was it was one of those things where we came in and they said, okay, well, who are you? Are you Nick Aldis? Are you Magnus? And to me, I said, well, I'm Nick Aldis now because I'm coming in as the Global Force World Champion. Like, surely I should be Nick Aldis, and they decided to do Magnus, and I thought it was a mistake because I think people went, well, what's he? What, people didn't know what was going on, and I honestly never had any intention to do any more than just that short run of shows. They asked me to come in and work with Alberto and do that, and I told them a number, and that was it, and I never had any intention of doing any more than that because I knew they were done, I knew that there was nothing left for me to achieve there, but I wanted to work with Alberto, so.
And how was that going with you, Alberto, Al Patron? Everybody knows him, Alberto Del Rio.
He's amazing. He's brilliant, and I was such a fan of his. I remember when he debuted in WWE. I remember going, "Now that's a star." Because obviously you see all these new characters, debut and stuff, and I respected him already because obviously I knew I knew of him before, and then I also respected like how he basically got that position. Like they brought him in and they were they're having a developmental and stuff, and he pretty much said, no, if like either do something with me or I'll just go back to Mexico. And they said, okay, fine, and they debuted him and he killed it, because he knew he was like, you could, when you meet someone like that, like he's a man's man, and you just and he had that presence and that aura about him where you just know this guy knows how good he is. Like, and it's not an arrogant thing, it's a professional thing. Like he knew how good he was, and he does to say, and I have a great deal of professional respect for him, and I loved wrestling him, and I tell you, this is as big a compliment as I can pay anyone in this business. When I was in there with him, it felt like it reminded me of when I was in there with Kurt Angle, because he like physically like makes you work in such a good way. Like he brings out this like real raw, authentic sort of athleticism to what he's doing, and it really and the only time I remember being in there thinking, oh geez, like okay, fine, we're in a fight, but not in a bad way, in like a really good, exciting way, and that's how I felt when I was in there with Kurt too.
I mean, that is a high praise there, comparing Alberto to Kurt Angle. And I just want to talk about two more things before I let you go. I know it's late on the East Coast, but the Aldis Crusade storyline in NWA. So 20 title defenses in 60 days. Barkley touched on it earlier, that title defense culminating with Colt Cabana in China. Tell me a little bit about that whole thing. I mean, 20 title defenses in a 2-month span's ridiculous.
I think it was more than that, actually. I think it was
really
what happened was I had my bookings already, because typically, if you're somewhat in demand on the independent scene, you tend to be booked about 3 to 4 months out, like that tends to be about the time frame. Sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, but most of the time you're kind of working, sort of in that sort of 3 months out kind of area. And at the time that I won the title the first time, at the end of 17, I had a bunch of bookings, and some of them were in the UK and Ireland, and some across the United States, and then the China thing came along, and I knew I had a tour of Australia booked in the summer for House of Hardcore. So we suddenly we sort of stumbled on this great opportunity, because at first the discussion was like, well, what are we going to do about title defenses? Are we gonna make them like a very rare thing, like a premium thing? How are we gonna do that? And I basically said, we can't do that. As soon as the audience know that I'm the NWA World Champion, and I show up to that show with the belt, but it's not on the line, people are gonna be disappointed. It's like, you want our brand to be associated with disappointment? No, like I said, every night should be a title defense, because then we can lay claim to being a real world championship, because I defended the title on 4 different continents in 1 year. So it just kind of happened that way, and then it was just funny to watch all these people kind of praise it, like, wow, they're going old school, like the traveling champion, and like this and that, and it was kind of like that just kind of happened, but we just made the effort, because Dave Lagana came with me to so many of those shows and documented them. And suddenly it created all this cool content, because people went, wow, this is really interesting. Like, this guy's going all over the world defending the world championship. And it was, and that was what caught Cody's attention. That's what caught the wrestling world's attention. And that's what kind of, got us to where we're at now.
And during that entire thing, did you, like, really enjoy that whole process? And what was your favorite title defense in that entire process?
Really, I couldn't tell you a favorite one. I really enjoyed. I had a really good match in Australia with Robbie Eagles. That was super fun, and I'm really glad to see him going on to have some success with New Japan. And he's a talented guy. It was a great crowd, and obviously it was Australia. Like, it's just you get to go, wow, I get to go to all these cool places and have a good match and make money. Like, sign me up. I had a really good match. With David Starr in England. That was fun, because it was a different kind of building, different kind of crowd, and like different kind of opponent in David, you know, because he's very much of the sort of indie, strong style, technical wrestling kind of ilk, and you know, it was like an opportunity for me to show that I can hang in that style. But the cool thing, you know, that is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I don't have a favorite because to me the whole point is to have that variety, you know. I had, you know, like to wrestle like a heavyweight one night and then like a smaller guy the next night and then a high flyer guy the night after that or a brawler the night after that. Like that's kind of the point, because then you get to, and then that stands you apart as the world champion, because you go, well, I'm the world champion. You know, I have to be able to do all of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And wrestling all those different kinds of guys, like you said, the brawler, the speedster, little guy, big guy, probably was an awesome experience for you. So after, I have one more thing for you. After picking your brain about your wrestling career for like about an hour now, I want to end the show. Basically, I do this every show with any of my guests. Basically, any weird, embarrassing situation, like precarious situation you've been in, whether it was ribbing in the locker room or even like at one of your swim meets when you were 16 years old. Give me like a weird story where you were caught in a sticky situation that was just flat out embarrassing.
No, for me, the one that springs to mind is so this was when Samoa Joe and I were a tag team. We were the tag team champions at the time, and we were on some house shows with TNA, and we were working with Matt Morgan and Crimson, and I was actually traveling with Crimson that loop, and we were in I want to say maybe Kentucky or West Virginia, somewhere like that, and it wasn't a particularly big town. So we leave this first night, and by the time we get out of the building, there's nowhere open for food. Like, we got to drive to the next town. So we're basically making that decision, like, you know, are we going to have a 6-pack of beer and like drive through or what? But there wasn't even drive through. You know, there was nowhere open in this town. Like, it was a really dead town. So we ended up having to get Subway. That was the only thing that was open, was a Subway at a gas station. Now, if you've been to gas station Subways at 1 a.m. in in the middle of nowhere, it's touch and go.
That sounds amazing.
Well, on this night I got go because I ate my sandwich. By the time I got to the hotel, I was sick as a dog. Like, I was puking. Like, I had food poisoning, plain and simple, right? I was puking, and I'm like, and here's the thing with me. I don't get sick very often, especially not, stomach-wise. But when I do, it's brutal. Like, it's like, my wife has told me, when you get sick, it's like the worst. Like, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's like, she's going to die. And so, like, I'm just hurling my intestines out. You know what I mean? I'm to the point where, like, Crimson calls D'Lo, who's the agent for the house shows, and says, Nick's really effed up here. Like, I don't, he can barely, like, he can barely take 5 steps before, like, collapsing and puking again. Like, this is, if he doesn't get any better by tomorrow, like, we're going to have a problem. D'Lo basically says, all right, well, keep an eye on him, and then, call me in the morning or whatever. By the morning, I finally kind of settled down a bit, had some Pepto, whatever. And, but it's, I'm suffering. Like, it was bad food poisoning. Like, I probably should have gone to a doctor. But, so I get to the building, and I haven't puked for about 2 hours. So we kind of make the call at like 5 o'clock. D'Lo's like, can you work? And I go, yeah, I can work. But I'm very delicate, you know what I mean? Like, I'm so out of it. Like, I'm super dehydrated. I'm just, because I can't take anything. Even if I drink water, I'm just immediately like, bleh. So I'm like a shell, like, I'm just kind of, like, Crimson and Gunner had to even help me, like, get my boots on and stuff, because I was just so, like, I was so weak. And so basically, they were just going to go out to the ring and kind of, Joe was going to do all the work, and we were going to do some kind of, schmoz finish. I don't know what we're going to do, but I was basically just going to tag in a couple of times, do a couple of stomps or whatever, and then get out and, and then do some sort of non-finish, right? So I get my stuff on, you know, it's about 10 minutes before we're about to go out. You know, Joe comes in and he's like, "You good? You okay?" I was like, yeah, I'm okay. I'll be all right. He's like, "All right, let's get through this, and then we'll get you, we'll get you back to bed. You'll be all right, blah, blah, blah." We go to the curtain, and I remember Gail Kim was wrestling before us, because I remember Gail's music hit, like she won her match, and we hear like 1, 2, 3, Gail's music hit. And I remember standing there, and I remember just thinking, like, I could feel the sort of gurgle in my stomach, and I went, "Oh, it's just air. It's okay. It's just wind." And I go to fart. I go to pass gas, and just shit my pants. Just shit my trunks. So Gail's music hitting. So I know I've got probably a minute before she's back, and however long JB is going to vamp in between matches, like, "Hey, who wants to go? Who wants a backstage pass? Who's making the loudest noise?" Or something, right? So I know I've got about 2 minutes, probably, or maybe 3, including Crimson and Matt Morgan's entrance, right? And I just take one look at Joe. I go, "I'll be right back," and I go running off, and Joe's like, "Oh, geez." I run off. I pull off my trunks, pull off my underwear, throw them in the trash. I was like, "They're finished." Grab my spare pair, pull them on, come back, and Joe's like, "Our music's hitting," and I come back, and Joe's like, "You okay?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Did you shit your pants?" I go, "Yep." And we just go walking through the curtain, and we're just like, because me and Joe would always do that thing where, like, we were kind of mouth, like we were kind of shit talking, like, just to whoever, to the world, as we were coming down it, but we were actually just talking to each other every time. So it was like, she was like, "Yeah, so you shit your pants, huh?" But like walking down there, I was like, "Yep, full on ski in my drawers," So yeah, that was those are the things that you don't see.
Oh, man.
It could have been a lot worse. Obviously, there have been stories about guys shitting their pants in the ring, but that was as close as I came.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. You're not the only one who's done that. There's been plenty of guys who have done that. You're not the first. That's okay. That happens sometimes.
A buddy of mine's a professional baseball player, Cody Decker. He plays.
Yeah.
He's on the squad for the Diamondbacks. He plays for the Reno Aces, and I had a show out in LA, and I remember I went to go lift with him during the day, and we went, and next thing you know, we're getting all competitive with each other, and we're doing like deadlifts and stuff. We're like deadlifting, 400 pounds, 500, whatever, And by the time I got to which was dumb on my part, because then I had to sit in the car for like an hour and a half, drive up the PCH to go to Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and like my back is so tight at this point, because it's like going from deadlifting and all that kind of stuff, to tire flipping and stuff, and then sitting in a car for an hour and a half. It's really dumb. Even dumber to do that and then wrestle. So like I'm just so stiff. I mean, like I'm literally walking around like I've got a weightlifting belt on, but I don't. And I remember like the guy I remember calling a slam on the floor, like to wake people up a bit, because that audience sometimes you got to kind of keep them on their toes a bit, because they've seen a lot of wrestling. And I remember calling like a slam on the floor, and he was like, "Sure." I was like, "Yeah." He slammed me on the floor, and I was convinced I had shit myself. I remember grabbing the referee. His name's Nick Bonanno. He's actually the guy who refereed my match in China with Colt too. And I remember saying, "Nick." He's like, "What?" I said, "Can you check did I shit myself?" And he kind of goes down and like looks at my butt and goes like, he's like, "No, you're good."
Was that after the first time?
Yeah. Oh, that was.
So you were just paranoid.
That was last year.
Oh my God. So yeah, you were paranoid for sure.
Well, I think because the thing is, my back was so numb from being so tight and stuff that I couldn't tell. And I was like, I don't know if that. I said to Nick, "Was that a fart or a shot?" And he's like, "I think it was a fart. I think you're okay."
You mentioned Cody Decker, and you mentioned the Flying Squirrels earlier. Like, for a guy who knows nothing about baseball, you sure do have a lot of baseball connections, Nick. We probably.
I got one baseball guy. Hey, if you're a baseball guy, did you see that Cody Decker's featured in an episode of 10 Pounds? It's I can't remember which episode it is now, but it's one leading up to NWA 70. So it was from like about September or October of last year. But there's footage from that training session that day, because he teach me how to throw a baseball. It's the first time I'd ever thrown a baseball properly in my life.
Oh, I'm definitely going to take a look at that.
You have to, and you'll be. I'm telling you, you're going to be impressed.
We'll see. I'll give you a text. I'll let you know whether I'm impressed or not. But
Well, when you Cody Decker literally says on the piece, like, that might be the best first pitch I've ever seen.
oh man, I can't wait to watch it. Well, Nick, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to chat. I know you've been busy all over the place. You got your match coming up at Crockett Cup against Marty Skrull. Good luck in that match, though. I have a feeling you won't need it. Very talented. At the same time, you guys know what's going to happen anyways.
Hey, watch it.
Hey, I can.
We don't know what's going to happen. That's the thing.
Oh, not yet?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, let us know when you know so we can report it first on our podcast.
Sure. I'll get right on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Nick.
Thank you.
I'll let you get back to your life.
Thanks, guys.